I'm not sure about everyone else, but I felt the energies start to shift probably in August, at the end of August. And then things just started accelerating, and now we're in a completely new space. So it's the change of seasons, but it's also change of a cycle, learning new lessons, integrating the previous ones. And I believe that speaking things into the world is really about just moving energy. And if we can have a witness, then that's even better. So that's the power of the third. 1 + 1 = 3, which kind of amplifies it. But nonetheless, just speaking out loud in general moves energy, right? This is the power of the breath of life. When we speak, we're literally breathing into this world. And if we're connected to soul, depending what we're connected to, what kind of energies we're connected to within ourselves, that is what we're going to be. Those are the type of energies and influences that we're going to be moving in the world. So talking to yourself out loud, I think is wonderful. And I think it's sad that society has kind of like shunned that. And, you know, if you see people talking to yourself, you automatically categorize them as crazy and so on and so forth. But some of the greatest thinkers and geniuses of our time, you know, people that have like inventors and just really awesome people from previous times were constantly speaking to themselves out loud. And so I invite everyone to encourage everybody to bring that into practice. And essentially, as I mentioned, we're just moving energy with the breath. And this is why intention is so powerful, because, you know, words, the more precision we have with words, which is difficult given the distraction of language, in the sense where a lot of the knots and problems that we see happen through our creation of language, and how we lost the magic, and how we somehow misconstrued a lot of what we're bringing forth through the language that we use. This is why we see people breaking down language, especially when they start dabbling into, you know, all the magic stuff. Basically, understanding language, de-occulting that is probably one of the most important things that we could be doing right now. But yeah, so I'm bringing this stuff forward, and as usual, there's a lot of different ideas that kind of, you know, all meshed up together that I'm clarifying for myself. But if you've been magnetized to this, then there's something in it for you. And so some of the names, like I've been really working on, you know, discovering who I am. This is part of this whole kind of experience that we have here in the hero's journey. And, you know, coming to understand ourselves, like knowing ourselves is half the battle. And being able to, in order to be able to transcend like layers of conditioning that are negatively impacting us, and like going through the healing process. And so as I journey, continue to journey on, like a big chunk of my time has been self-discovery. That's why I write so much. And I'm often writing what I see, a lot of what I've understood about myself through my astrological chart, but just in general, working with different people in different groups, is that there's sort of like a collective karma around the personal work that I'm doing. And so I deal a lot with processing and transmuting collective energy and trying to bring balance, like finding that middle path between all these different energies to birth that forth, to stabilize the energies. And so collective karma has been used as a term to describe some of the work that I do. I've been called a muse by many. Oracle is another word. Heyuka can sometimes be ascribed to me, but I really like the term mortal mirror. And I think that to a large extent, we're all reflecting back to each other, right? Because we're connected to this collective unconscious and to the mythologies and to the energies, really, and this interconnectedness after my awakening. I really understood what that was because I just was completely blown open and completely connected to all the pain and suffering around the globe. Every little movement, the weather, so on and so forth, which was not a very fun experience. And I am still connected, but coming back, like doing the personal development work and hypnosis work, like knowing thyself, has really allowed me to like reintegrate back into my particular stream of essence and understand myself more, understand my purpose, you know, just identifying where my boundaries begin and where they end and all of that jazz. So it's been really, really helpful in the sense that I don't have to feel as much. There are still times where the energies become heightened and then I am transmuting, like doing this collective karma type of work and transmuting energies and working with people one-on-one. I still feel like I'm reflecting back to them a lot of what is within the subconscious realms of the interactions. And so that can often sort of bring up a lot in the interactions. And then I also have to, you know, I've learned through this process of learning about myself and how, you know, how I work and what my mechanics are and how I operate in the world has allowed me to really distinguish which types of people I can interact with for those particular reasons, right? So if I'm bringing up a lot of the subconscious stuff, like I have to be prepared. If I'm interacting with someone who is doing a lot of personal development work, well, that's just going to accelerate that, right? Or if there is a lot of shadow and they still haven't busted through and done the shadow work, there's going to be a lot of triggering in the interactions. I'm basically amplifying whatever energies are present. And so it's been really fun learning about that and then understanding that depending who I'm interacting with, if it's an energy, if it's a person who has a similar way of thinking than I do and is on a similar path, like that energy just gets amplified and it just becomes like all of the positives just get amplified. So it's like you're in the flow with that person. So a lot of the work that I've been doing on myself is just understanding who I am, what people are best to interact with based on how I'm hardwired in my purpose here. And so this brings me into some of the things that I wanted to discuss, leading into the more philosophical nature of my studies in regards to finding solutions for what's happening on the planet right now. And a lot of what I do in my spare time is mostly just, you know, over the years been just focused on like, okay, how do we solve these worldly problems? We've been exposed to them through the global community. We've had an opportunity to basically see every little nook and cranny, you know, everything happening. And so perhaps because of the way I'm hardwired, this has been my main squeeze in terms of what I'm focused on. We're all contributing, right? So it's not really so much for me as a feminine bringing order, but it's working in synergy with the energies that are available to me and then being able to produce the best outcome. So understanding these layers of similarities and differences that we have with with each other on an individual level, within personal relationships, and then on this more global level, like between cultures, between religions, has been very insightful. So doing the work with the astrology, for example, which is, it is a complete science in a sense where everything is reflecting back on a micro and a macro level. So I've gone over this in previous videos, where you are, like the location that you're born and the exact time. All of these things matter in terms of, you know, looking at where these bodies of consciousness were in the sky, right? And then they create specific sigils or configurations that create the layers of mechanics within ourselves and how consciousness is operating within ourselves. And so in ancient times, you know, this is what we had. We would look at the sky and we'd be able to predict what was coming, because we know that when certain constellations were transiting, certain things would happen on the planet. So it's the same thing. When certain constellations are transiting, certain planets are transiting, certain things are happening within ourselves. So if you start to study that and you apply it, you use that structure to just observe and to see for yourself, you'll notice that there is definitely something to it. Just like the cycles of the seasons, with every season comes something new, and nature is constantly reflecting these transitions and the new energies coming and going. And so by using this system, I was able to really look at everybody as individual beings, having their own experience based on their own particular configurations, like kind of their map to the universe. And that sort of allowed me to understand even deeper, like that everyone's on a particular soul mission, right? Everybody's here configured differently, hardwired differently to produce different outcomes and to do different things, right? And that's kind of the synergy happening behind the scenes, and why linear thinking can only take us so far. Because at one point there's this sort of combinatory combustion, and we can't track past a certain point what's happening, but it's still happening all in this divine order. But there are kinks in the divine order, right? Everything had a cause and effect. And if you go back far enough, small little movements change the timeline completely. And so that's why for working with past, present, and future, and then lower to higher levels and dimensions, the higher you are, the further back you are, small movements make big changes, right? It's just like if you're angling your pool cue on like a billiard like ball, right? If you're playing a game of pool, you just turn the stick a little bit, and then boom, it's going, like the angle is just going to go off drastically. So so we have this system taking place, and that's within ourselves, and it's more attuned to consciousness, but it's working in conjunction with matter. And if you go back to my last video, you'll see how the stages of development are mapped out through the constellations, and working with matter, the body, sensations, the mind, the emotions, the creativity, the work, the relationships, deeper into the subconscious realm where things could be unearthed, into the primal, and then back out again through the death and rebirth process and the higher learning, and then coming to this kind of pinnacle where all this energy sort of culminates, and then moving even further into the collective and into these like larger institutions and groups of consciousness, and then kind of coming to a close, like the conclusion of that, and the highest point we can reach in our connection with spirit and on our journey here. And then we cycle back, right? So we have this going on individually within ourselves. And then we have layered on top of that what, you know, I kind of was started studying politics, and so understanding it through these different political systems and what those divisions are, what the parameters are, what they're trying to figure out. And, you know, a lot of the problems that we have are based on our inability to communicate efficiently, right? Because we are so different. Not only are we hardwired differently in terms of our astrological chart and the mechanics of consciousness, but also the layer on top of that, like the DNA and the cultural imprints that we had, like through thousands and thousands and thousands of years, our ancestors have lived a certain way. They usually lived in, you know, we all moved around, like every culture has moved somewhat around, but a lot of the migration didn't really happen that much that far until more recently. So previous to that, like we would stay in places for prolonged periods of time. And so understanding biodiversity of the mind, understanding why we think differently, is understanding neurodiversity, and that's understanding the way we process information, how one culture processes information so differently than another culture. And then part of the problem is trying to fit everybody, like, because with the advent of the internet and connecting globally and a lot more kind of migration and bringing different cultures together, we've been really trying to work on, like, well, how can we understand each other, right? Instead of just going and trying to conquer and, you know, completely eliminate another culture in order to take land, territory, resources. How can we live together? And it's always been just like, you know, decimate the people when culture wanted the resources, because there is a limited capacity to communicate. And this is because there is a natural biodiversity of minds that within that culture, you know, you have all these different people working their different astrological charts and their different mechanics, but then that is a body of consciousness itself, like that culture. They're eating specific foods, walking the land, living a specific lifestyle. And I think that the diet and the daily routines play a huge role in that neurodiversity. The mythologies, like the art, everything, if you look at different cultures, you're like, wow, they're just producing such amazing art, and it's also different. It looks different, it feels different. Then you talk to people from different cultures, and it's even more amazing to understand when you really spend time with people from other cultures, that you think people that are foreign to yourself, and you spend some time learning their language and really trying to understand different people. You understand that there's not only differences, like basic differences in what we eat and, you know, how we do things, like the rituals and the rites of passage that we go through. Like there's a fundamental difference in the way that our processing of information happens. The way we process information, the way we experience reality is very different. So the hard problem of consciousness, you know, if I ask you to describe like different things like the taste of chocolate, right, or the color of red, we can't compare that stuff. Like we can't even try to describe it. It just is. We just know that. So we've managed to, you know, come together and be able to objectively use words to describe things that we can all agree upon. Like we can all use a different word to just say red. But the fact is that we're all seeing that color differently. And then if you're coming from a different culture, those differences start to expand drastically. When you're around people who have been experiencing life, eating the same things, walking the land, being in connection with nature, like having those rituals to stay in connection with nature and to the divine and all that in similar ways, you're more apt to have a similar experience of those different things, such as tastes and colors, so on and so forth. So the more different the cultures are, we can both point to the thing being red, but that doesn't mean that we're experiencing red as red in the same way. We just agree that we're both experiencing something called red, and we can, it's repetitive, right? We know that when we see red, it's red. So this is where the differences are truly so present. And I think we tend to forget that. And there is a great desire to be in harmony with each other, not have to kill, to all kind of work together. And that is part of human evolution. Like, we don't want to just say, okay, we all have these differences. We all think differently on a very fundamental level. And so we can't work together at all. So I'm finding the middle path here, because on both of the extreme right and the extreme left, the extremes of everything is like, either we all become the same, which is impossible, like for that to just happen, because we are so hardwired differently. And we have neurodiversity. We process things differently. So, talking is one thing, and then, expecting the other to really think like us and to see our perspective, like straight from the get-go, is something else entirely. And it's not something that happens in the way we would like it to. Like, so, and then on the extreme other side of things, an extreme right, it's like, well, these differences are there and they will never be overcome. It's kind of the same thing. Like, both extremes are sharing the same view. One is like, let's make us all the same. And the other is like, we are so different, we can never be the same. But both at the end have solutions that don't work, because it is impossible to say, we're not going to try to find solutions, right? Because we all share the same planet. And then it's impossible to say we're all just going to make everybody the same. If you lose diversity, first of all, it's impossible. Okay, I don't care how many, whatever people think that they can do in order to make everybody the same, you can't force certain things. And if you lose diversity, you are losing like one of the most essential parts of what makes life beautiful. And yeah, that is very racist. And so this is where we're having to understand, what it is we're trying to do. And there's this surface kind of superficial understanding of racism, and then there's the deeper understanding. And this is where honoring neurodiversity requires us to really work with our energy and work with our own culture. And the better we get at working, at operating efficiently within our own families, within people that are similar to us, that share that same neural networking, the neurodiversity, then the better we're going to get at working with people who have completely different way of processing information and perceiving the world around them. So we can work together, but, and this is where, for example, I've had people around me say, listen, you can't go into another country and then start trying to fix their problems, because, and then this is a conversation that I've been having with some of my elders for a long time. And then I'd say, yes, but, if we don't go in and help these people, who are basically being inflicted, like they're just like, their human rights issues are being affected, like, it's unjust. And then seeing that is very painful, and then brings up this desire to go in and assist. And then the elders would say, well, if they can't work out that for themselves, within their own culture, understanding that they're all processing information, that neurodiversity is similar, that pattern is similar within their own way of being, their own way of processing information, and their own way of perceiving the world and experiencing reality. And if they can't come into balance and harmony within their collective group, then no matter what we do, they're not going to be able to come into harmony with anybody else's. That's even, that's different. Any other culture that would be different. And so there's also this, savior, victim, perpetrator thing that happens, because as soon as you go in and try to save people, you inadvertently become a perpetrator. And when you become a perpetrator, you end up becoming the victim, because people will fight back and push back against you, because you're becoming an enabler, essentially, for people, repressing people from coming into their own power. There's all these different things happening. So we're having to really understand where we're taking our power back and where this personal development is happening. We have to take personal responsibility for ourselves. And if we have someone who comes in and their intentions aren't necessarily to, be friends with you in an equal manner, right? So a lot of relationships are based on these weird kind of savior dynamics. I've had my own share of, this is imprinted, especially if you're a caregiver from a young age and you're having to care for people in your environment, this is something that it's a pattern that you're just going to repeat. And then until you realize it's unfair to the people that you are interacting with, because it's automatically assuming that there's something, less than, and you kind of place yourself above them. So if that relationship backfires, it's your fault. I've had to really understand that unless someone asks for help, don't go out of your way and, put yourself in their life and then stir up that dynamic of victim, perpetrator, and savior, because it's not going to end well. And so we're having to learn this on an individual level, and it's coming in mutual reciprocity, honoring the other. And if we're coming forward, towards the other in a way where we're letting things naturally, is a very feminine way, but we're letting things naturally kind of happen. There's no strong intention to control or to dictate or save or, and then on the flip side of that, there's the opportunist, like where a lot of people get caught in all the multipolar traps and all that sort of thing. They're basically always just looking for opportunity, right? So that's the flip side of the savior is, the opportunist. And so we're having to find, and that's no good either, because then you don't actually have any real quality friendships, right? There's no soul. It's just like, okay, what can I get from this person? What can I get from that person? And is there a mutual exchange? And, that's very dry. So we want to be able to work with people, and say, okay, there's something that we can do together because the energy is flowing. And so this model of relationship, once we can get that right within our own relationships and that healthy dynamics within our own relationships with our family members and our friends, and then in our community, then we can start applying that model on the global scale and understand boundaries, and then start building things up from the inside so that as a country, we're self-sufficient, we're strong, to the best of our capabilities, so that when we're interacting with other countries, there's not this kind of like, I'm going to save you, but really I need to take, a whole bunch of your resources, right? There's a lot of that. And that ties into all the virtue signaling and all of that stuff happening. So my thoughts have been, leading in this direction. And then I wanted to bring in also, with relationships. Like this has been a really interesting, because I've been studying relationship dynamics between men and women for a long time, understanding that the mating ritual is at the root of most of our interactions, and how all these different species of animals have such different mating rituals. It's just, you can kind of see different cultures reflected, because it's from the micro to the macro. And we all have animal in us. We're all partly primal animal, kind of instinctual creatures. And so you can see these kind of primal mating rituals happening within the human, and then seeing how different everybody is from that perspective. And then understanding why some relationships work out and why some relationships don't work out. Because the different species, right, of human, based on how we're hardwired with the planets and, you know, all of the really deep core mechanics of who we are, layered with our cultural mechanics, really create different types of attraction and repulsion. So dating people from a completely different culture doesn't always work, because there's these blocks in the way that you think and you process information. Then you just keep on coming up and, you know, hitting certain walls. And different cultures from around the world do have certain similarities. And then depending on the core mechanics of that person, some people are naturally more open, like the way that their neurodiversity, like with the way their brain is hardwired, they can interact with more cultures because they have a certain type of neural pattern mapping itself in the brain that has a greater match to greater cultures. And then you have some people that just don't have that expansive neurodiversity, right? To take in many different ways of processing things. And so, you know, these people are going to find it harder to understand. Like, they're less likely to have a successful relationship with someone from a completely different culture. And so, and you can notice these patterns within yourself. Patterning is predominantly Gaelic, like the Scottish, right? The Celtic, the French Celts from Troy, and then going towards Northern Europe. And so a lot of the interactions that I have with opposite sex, like, often tend to be either that Northern European, the Irish, and the Scottish. And it's just like, it's this natural thing. It's like, oh, I'm like surrounded by a bunch of, you know, people from my culture. Even when I travel across the globe, it's like I'll find these people because the neural patterning is the same. And the way we understand the world is the same. The way we're processing information is the same. You know, people from Ireland and those ancestral roots that I have, like, we see things through metaphor, right? And so if you take a culture like that, you know, that's constantly moving through, you know, talking and expressing themselves with a lot of metaphor, things are layered up. It's not as direct as the English. So I have that, you know, Anglo-Saxon as well roots, but leads more into Northern Europe quite rapidly. And it's very direct, right? And you can kind of see the differences. Like, the Irish are going to skirt, like the Gaelic, like, they're skirting around, you know, they're going to say it in 100 ways except for saying it directly. And whereas the Northern European, like, it is just so direct. Everything is direct. And so that's why I've also been, like, attracted to people from that place. Like, a lot of my friends are, you know, I'll just, like, previous partners that I've had or whatever are from those areas. And, you know, I just love Polish people. Why do I love Polish people? Because there's something in my blood. I could just understand them. Just like, I understand you. I'm just totally comfortable. And we see these patterns kind of come back up, even though we're living in the West. And a lot of people, you know, you ask them, where are you from? They're like, I'm Canadian. Yeah, but your neural patterning is based on a whole line of ancestors coming from a different place in the world. And the better that you understand that, the more you're going to understand why you come into differences with people from different cultures, you know, and then the easier it is to work through them. And to understand yourself is such half the battle, because then you're no longer fighting on an issue that really has no solution except for an acceptance of the differences in the thinking of the neural patterning, and then knowing the boundaries and the limits of those relationships. So there's a lot of wisdom in that, if you can get it. And so this is part of there's a really interesting YouTube. I forget the name of the YouTube channel, but basically, you're like, if you type in, you're dating a, let's say, Polish man, or you're dating an Irishman, or whatever, or a woman, and from all these different cultures, and they're 5-minute skits, and you can just look at the differences. And then getting to know, using your astrological chart, you're looking at your ascendant, look on the opposite side and see what constellation sits in your 7th house. And by looking at what constellation sits in your 7th house, you're going to be able to tell what type of energy you're requiring from your relationships in order to balance your own energy out. And then also looking at your Venus and Mars, and any configurations of those are really going to help you understand what type of people, like what type of hardwiring and mechanics you're going to work best with. And so if you want to contact me about setting up a session to look at all of this stuff that I'm discussing, but also delve into the relationships, you can reach me at inspiringplayfulevolutions.com under Systems of Gnosis. I love doing that type of work, working with people on that level, to help them better understand themselves in terms of generating the relationships that they want in their lives, because I spend so much time studying this stuff and just studying human nature, right? Because there are similarities between all cultures, but it's not like the similarities are ever going to be, we are one, right? Like the false light that happens with the extreme left, right, of like, we're just all one, and you know what I mean? And we don't have to look at these differences. We don't have to honor these differences. Those differences aren't really there. We're all human, and so we're all the same. It's like, no, we are fucking not all the same, right? And let's honor those differences, and let's honor that diversity. Learning about ourselves in this way, and learning about globally how we can work some of these solutions out. Like, we have to evolve and come to, political understandings, economic understandings, where we're all at least agreeing on certain things. So agreeing that we can't all, be molded into one, and the value of diversity, the value, and just knowing that there's certain diversity that's so deep at our core, such as the mechanics of our astrological chart and the mechanics of our neurodiversity based on, our ancestral lineages, which isn't a negative thing, right? If you look out and imagine going out into a field and seeing only the same flower, we don't want that. We really appreciate having the beauty of diversity with all these different things. Coming to this middle way with understanding all these things might help prevent us from perpetuating wars. I'm bringing all this stuff forward as a way to bring things into the world through the power of my breath, and to share, whether people are listening or not, it really doesn't matter. I think that having a witness is powerful enough. And if you can kind of understand the way everything is connected, it only takes one. And then you have that 1 + 1 = 3. And, something that I discovered when I was going through my awakening process. And once you've integrated, you can kind of see how interconnected web is happening. And walking through a crowd, and you're discussing with a friend, and as you say one sentence, you're passing by someone who just brushes your shoulder, and they have this certain look on their face, and you can, that sentence was meant for them. And so when you can widen your perception up and understand, and this happens all the time, listen to that one sentence that person will capture as they're going by, and know in your heart that it's for them. It's the same as when we experience synchronicity, and they're so precious, and it's like they're signs from the divine. That's how those synchronicities happen. Is we're just at that spot, and then that person says, that one book name, and you're like, yeah, I've really been wanting to read it, and then you just go and buy it, and then you're writing essays on it, and so on and so forth. And so everything is interconnected. It's beautiful interconnected web of life. We're just having to keep, we have to keep on learning and honoring each other and learning from our ancestors, learning about, the mythologies, understanding our own language and how we're hardwired, trying to understand our neurodiversity in the best possible way, so we can just honor other people. The more you know yourself, there's just this understanding of like not wanting to control or meddle so much in other people, because there's not this desperate attempt to try and understand the self through other. We know that we're producing messages, we're reflecting back to each other constantly, and we are, the think tank, we're each other's think tanks, but knowing ourselves just allows us to understand that when something's not for you, right, and there's this easing of kind of like, I'm not going to go and fight something that's not for you. It's never going to end well. It's never going to end well, because there are fundamental differences and fundamental biodiversities that we must honor. This neurodiversity, we must honor it. And if we're going to get anywhere closer towards peace and truly evolving, we're going to have to continue to honor each other and our differences, and know that you can't just keep on, hitting your head against a rock. It's like you want to flow with what feels good, with what understands you, what you can work best with. Like all of this is about finding people that have that similar neurodiversity, because when you're with people from your own culture, or who have that similar imprint astrologically, right, at that core mechanics, they could be from a different culture, but they have that similar imprint. You're just, you're so happy to be with each other, and it's so productive, and there's just no kinks, right? It's just like there's no kinks in the rope. It's just like, yeah, let's, one person, it's like the conversation just flows, and then solutions come up, and everything's flowing beautifully, and things progress. So, so part of, finding your tribe is first having to understand who you are, right? Because you can be interacting with people who have similar neural patterning to yourself, but if you haven't done the healing work and you're constantly love bombing people, or you're gaslighting everybody because, the pain that you're carrying inside is just so great, and, you're only getting your self-worth through saving people and all of this stuff, then, you might have found your tribe in terms of like, people that are truly hardwired the same way as you, but you won't be able to work with them because you have to do the work of knowing yourself and healing work and all that to come to a place of wholeness. And then it will be possible to step into a greater active role with different people. And in terms of relationships, friendships as well. There's so many women that like I just couldn't understand them, and I would try to understand why they were doing certain things, and they probably have psychological issues from childhood, or they're dealing with this, right, or they're going through that. But then also just understanding like cultural differences, like they are hardwired so differently. It's like if you take an Irish woman, and then you take a woman from like Latin America, like a Mexican woman, and then you take an African woman, right? And then you have a Swedish woman, and then you have, an Islamic woman, and you put them all in the same pot. Like, it's just so much easier once you understand that everybody's brains are literally hardwired differently, the way they're perceiving things, and then culturally, the way that they interact is just so different. Like the Gaelic, like the Northern European women, like, our men didn't have like 5 wives, and we used to fight next to our husbands. Like we would fight next to our men, and we weren't fighting physically, but we were so intertwined with them energetically. Like this is where the oracle comes from. It's like our participation in the struggle for survival was to be the clearest mirror possible for them. you know something's real when it brings up a lot of emotion. So understanding like how each person is just doing a different thing and operating from a different cultural lens, which really is like perception is different, right? It goes so deep. The way they see the color red is different. The way they see the color green, like the way they smell a rose is different, right? And so once you understand that, there's no longer like this battle, right? So just understanding women better, understanding all these different, like, wow, it's just, it allowed me to not have to struggle so much to try and understand, because there's just certain things you can't understand. Like you can't see what they see from, you'll never see the color blue the way they see it, right? And so understanding that there's certain differences, that it's just differences in neurodiversity and perception are not meant to be the same, and then, wow, it just opens up. It's like, okay, I understand that, it's completely different for them. And of course, they're going to experience things differently, but I know who I am and I know who I work best with. Then moving in that direction, it's like there's no conflicts, right, that arise. And so the same for partnerships, working with people who, having a relationship, an intimate partnership with the opposite sex, and having that with someone who is hardwired the way you are, I guess it's just such a beautiful thing. And it alleviates so many problems. And so if you're lucky enough to have that hardwiring on a core mechanical level, like at a soul level, and you come from different cultures, then that's great. But if you're having trouble truly connecting with people, then I recommend going and spending time with people from your ancestral lineage, to really help remind you of, because you can see the pattern reflect, and then you can more easily understand yourself, and then understand better that, yeah, there's differences with people that are not from my culture, and then there's just kind of this easing of understanding that takes place. But I think I'm going to leave it there for today. Really hoping that in 2023, we're going to be able to find a lot more answers, like regarding, what steps we need to take next for ourselves and on a global scale as the economy changes and shifts our way of interacting with each other. This kind of like coming together, like the feminine energy that has been awakening, it's less goal oriented, and it's more oriented towards how we process things, right? Not so much the personal development, but just like being focused on the process to that masculine energy of clarity and order and like goal orientation, the process, and then the goals. Like that's when that comes into balance, that's when we're really going to start seeing, I think, beautiful changes on the planet. So wishing everybody a wonderful November. Take care.